but no one has ever managed to stop nicotine use, or drug use, or alcohol use.
Coolio. Let's get into it then. Thank you for joining. Alex, James, how are we, gents? Start with you, James. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Great stuff. Alex?
Very well, thank you. Just getting my specs on.
Getting the old specs on. He loves it. He loves the specs. Look, James, thank you for joining. This one came around pretty quickly. I'm glad we definitely got the time to record this one. I'm really excited to hear what you've got to say. Could you just give a little bit of a background on yourself and e-cigarette direct, and just let the listeners and equally myself and Alex know what your role is and what you set out to achieve with e-cigarette direct?
Sure. Well, I was a teacher originally, teaching English in Asia and the Middle East. And while I was in the Middle East, I set up a travel website. Which got quite large, and I remember I used to make more from that than from my job. And then I came back home in 2008 for the summer, and I was in my mother's house, and she showed me a device she'd picked up at a trade show, a little white thing that looked like a cigarette, and she said, "Try this," and I had a puff on it, and vapor came out, and it was just like a cigarette. And she said, "Do you think you could build a website to sell it?" And I thought, well, I'd give it a go. I hadn't built an e-commerce website before, but I did build it. It was an awful first website, but people bought from it. And for a while, I was still living in Qatar, in Doha, and I was handling the website and the marketing. And then in 2010, I came back to work on it full time, and the business slowly grew. Initially, very rapidly grew from there.
Interesting. That's an interesting start, actually. You know what? That was the last thing I kind of would have thought that had got you into, e-cigarettes and vaping. Did you ever find yourself was that? I suppose the question is was it a natural direction for you to take after creating the e-commerce store, or did you have other options on the table, or were you always set out to kind of do that?
I think I wanted to do something. I mean, building the website in Qatar and running that, and we got a lot of traffic, and it was a real learning curve, and I learned a lot about content and search engine optimization. And I knew I wanted to take that forward, and there's only so much you can do with advertising, and there was a limit on where you could go from there, especially with all sort of restrictions on doing business in the Middle East. So I was looking for something, and I was abroad for 9 years, and I was ready to come home as well after that. So I was looking for a route to come home.
Yeah, and I don't know whether I missed it, so apologies. But when was this? What time of when was this in your career?
So this was summer 2008,
mm-hmm.
And I stayed on in Qatar another 2 years after that, and then I came back summer 2010 and worked on it full time, with a lot of late nights until then.
Yeah, I bet. I think from what I've heard about people starting businesses, they don't do it on a 9-to-5 schedule, that's for sure. I know.
Well, certainly not in the early years. I mean, later on, when we built up the management structure, then you gain more freedom, But in the early years when we were building up, it required a lot, especially when you've got a job and another website to run as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it looks like you took the right direction. That's for sure. I think you've definitely made a success of something that was, you know, started from as a recommendation from your mum as a small device got from a market. I feel like you've done pretty well there. Look, we've got lots of topics we want to cover. Anything just to follow on from that, Alex, before we get into actual?
No, just one really quick question. So, from my perspective, out of interest, so were you a kind of a vapor before you having that conversation with your mum, or is it actually on the back of building up the store and thinking, hold on, I might have something here? Did that get you into then vaping itself?
I'd never heard of it before she handed over that device. I mean, no one had really. You know, when in those days, you would, you'd walk around with a cigarette, and people would come and eat cigarette, and the people would come and tell you off for smoking. You say, "Oh, I'm not smoking." They go, "Oh, crikey, what is that?" So it was at a time when very few people had heard of it. And the marketing was different then, because you couldn't optimize for people looking for it so much because, no one had seen it before. So back in those days, we used to do a lot of shows and, look for people smoking and say, look, have you tried this? If not, you need to try it. So it was quite different than those days.
Awesome. So kind of a little bit like the business itself, wasn't a kind of, it wasn't naturally something you were into anyway, but almost by chance. The two go hand in hand for you. You've become a keen vapor, but also running a successful vaping business.
Yeah. Well, we knew we wanted to do something, but I didn't know what it was until I came across this.
Awesome. Some of the best businesses are set up like that, right? Not necessarily not with an end goal in mind as such, but actually it's opportunistic and thinking, hold on, I've got something here. Maybe not too many people, other people are doing it. Let's have a good stab and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've heard a bit about the backstory. Where are you now with e-cigarette direct? What's kind of your direction you're taking now? What's the mission? What's the overall vision for yourself and the brand?
Oof. It's a good question. For us, it's the main area we want to develop at the moment is the website. We've had times where the period of focus was working on the shops, but for us a lot of our effort now is going into building the next version of the website, and a lot of our time is and we really want to get a site which is easy to use for the customer, and it is fast and it's full of high quality content that really adds value to the customer. So one part of it is at the moment working with the development team to take the website onto a new level. But another part of that is is a lot of it's going through the old content. Is it useful? Deleting it is not useful. Improving it, improving the quality of it. But we have the business is 3 parts. And we are thinking about all of them all the time, obviously, and we have the shops as well. So that's one area where I think what we really want to focus on is the interaction with the customer more than anything else. And we're also, of course, we have our wholesale side as well, which is important to us.
And just out of interest on that, so you mentioned obviously the business is, I guess, kind of 3-pronged at the moment. You've got the direct to consumer by way of the shops and by the website, and you've got the wholesale business as well. The website itself is seems to be a real focus now for the business and a kind of priority. What is it that's made the business shift some focus towards really honing on the website and improving that as a priority?
I think it's partly natural development. So during COVID, obviously our shops were shut for months at a time, and at the same time the web traffic went through the roof, and at one point I think we were up 600% in terms of web sales. It coincided with making some improvements to the website as well, which helped. And unfortunately, because of the when it was several months into COVID, we knew that traffic into the shops wasn't going to go back to the same level, and traffic to the website wasn't going to drop to the same level. So we had to we made a decision to close some of the shops, so it became a smaller part of our business. And now the shops, we're starting to see a strong recovery there. But in terms of the website, it's not quite at the peak it was in COVID, but it certainly hasn't dropped to the level it was pre-COVID. So it's become a much bigger part of our business, and I think it's where we can reach the most people in the future.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, isn't it? Because I guess the pandemic, sometimes I'll be honest, I'm loath that we're still talking about it. But it is one of those things in our lifetime that really, is going to have a legacy effect on a lot of businesses and a lot of retail and operations in general. And it's just really interesting that you mentioned there that it was that as a compelling event that maybe pushed people towards the website, but actually it's not just been a kind of one-time hit. Actually, that's just pushed a lot of people and their behaviours, and actually now they are shifting those buying habits to being online. And you mentioned there about interaction with the customer, and I guess that leads to experience. And actually, maybe initially the website was something where it was just supplementary to the overall approach of the business through the shops, whereas now that focus has changed, and actually the need for good experience, good user access, that sort of stuff is actually more important now on the website than it's ever been, and maybe continues to be the focus moving forward. And it's funny because user experience wasn't necessarily maybe years gone by as big a part of the priority on the website, whereas now, as you alluded to there, it's a real priority because that's where maybe now the majority of the business is falling through.
It's also, of course, it's highly competitive on the web. And I mean, analogy, in a town, you might have a handful of competitors, and there might be some way from each other. But when you perform a search for a keyword, it's like having 1,000 shops, all next door to each other, all with the prices hanging outside the front door, or shouting for you to come in. So there's distinct challenges there. I mean, I would say in our shops, we've got good people there. They're well trained. They're good at assessing vapors' needs and then recommending the right product. We're generally highly competitive for products. So, and I don't say forgetting about them, but the biggest challenge at the moment, I think, is getting web right, and that requires constant focus and attention.
So, just out of curiosity, how do you plan to stay ahead? It's a question that I'm assuming you're kind of thinking, well, if I tell you everything, that's telling everyone.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Don't give away all your trade secrets at once.
Yeah. Exactly. Don't tell us all how to open up a vaping store online. Don't do that. But just a little bit on that, because like you say, it's very difficult to stand out in a crowd, and when you're in a shop, you can have that personal touch. How do you plan to convert that experience to online in a similar way? What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, you can't completely. I mean, shops have got a lot of advantages over the website, but some of them have been taken away from COVID. So one is, it's the personal interaction you can get in the shop, and you get that a little bit with people, having good people on the phone, and the service they provide. But it doesn't. You can't fully replace the personal relationships you build up in a shop, obviously. Now, prior to COVID, a big factor was being able to try different devices and different e-liquids, but with the hygiene rules we got in now, that's just that's gone, and that's a huge disadvantage. But you still got the needs analysis. You can talk to someone, right? So we'll say, like, okay, you've got arthritis in your hand, so what you need is something which is really easy to use with big buttons and pre-filled pods. So you just plop it in, and that's going to work for you. Or you get you might get a builder coming in from the site next door. It's go, all right, what you need is a massive mod with a huge battery, which is not going to drop. It's not going to break when you drop it. So you're never going to have that. But not completely. But what I think you can do is you can provide information that people need to help them select the devices, help them troubleshoot them if there's a problem. You can focus on the user experience of the website, really trying to make it as pain-free as possible and quick as possible to make a purchase. You can focus on making the site load as fast as possible. So it's a very different situation for a shop, but there may be some lessons you can take from it. So I don't know how coherent that sounded.
No, that was good. Go on, Alex.
Yeah, I was saying, I think what's really interesting is that customer experience, clearly, because you've got a virtual environment and a real life environment, are going to be very different. But I guess it's like, what's the priority of that customer experience? And you actually articulated it really nicely. And that when it's in store, it's about the fact you've got really good people who have good knowledge, they're well trained, and you've got that sort of needs analysis of understanding their customer and running through that process of actually identifying what's the best product to meet their needs. And that's great. You can do that in store. Replicating it online is difficult, but actually it's because maybe the currency that works in terms of the user experience online is actually convenience, and making, as you mentioned, is making it as seamless and easy and as user friendly as possible. And actually that's the currency that is kind of being traded in terms of that user experience online. And I guess that's where being a kind of multi-channel retailer, you've got the benefit of both, because if people want the seamless, easy, just want it done nice and easy experience, they can do that online, and having a great website allows them to do that. If they want a bit more interaction, they want some expertise, they want some help, that's when they can go to one of the stores and they get that experience there. And I guess that's the benefit, but also the kind of the challenge, which is a good one, of blending that across both channels and getting that mix right for your audience. But no, like I said, I'm probably now just kind of really reiterating exactly what you said. I kind of like how you touched on how that experience changes across the different channel.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's parallels in places, similarities in places, and other areas they're completely different, but there's certainly lessons you can learn. I mean, there's data you can get from the shops, okay, so what questions are people coming in with, what products are they asking for that we don't have, what are they buying, and what are their favorite flavors. All of these sort of things can inform everything from product selection to the content you put on, I'm always asking, what problems do people have, and that we can, provide a solution to on the blog.
Yeah. And again, I think we've done a few podcasts recently where everyone's leaning towards that kind of education piece and that education marketing, which is essentially what we're talking about here. It's about educating a market that don't have that personal touch where you can walk into a store and be educated. If I was to take up vaping, granted I'm not one now, but if I was to I wouldn't know where to start. But if I was to go into a store, I'd probably walk out with a product. But if I was to go online to a website, I wouldn't know what I'm buying. So I suppose that's the difference. It's about educating your ideal customer or new customers what they should and shouldn't buy at a particular time. And I think that's kind of what we're leaning into here.
Yeah, and I find I learn a lot every time I go to one of our shops. I would go there and just spend an hour asking questions, and because they're there every day. They're talking to customers. If there's any problems with the device, they find out what it is. If there's a way to solve that problem, they find out it is. They find out what the trends are. So it's a fantastic source of information for me and the company as well. It's a real source of information, and the people in the shops are experts because this is what they're doing every day. I think we find that someone will learn in the shop in a couple of weeks what would take them maybe 2 or 3 months at the end of a phone here. And I find that when I go to the shops, I learn a lot from speaking to the people there as well.
Yeah,
cool. And just on that, so kind of touched on the education piece and all the knowledge that yourself and a lot of the other people in the shops and the wider business have. I guess and George talked about if me and him were to go into one of your shops right now, we'd be starting from base level because we're not vapers. We'd need that education. So from our point of view, we're kind of aware that vaping really is seen as a way and as an alternative to smoking itself. As a way to move people away from that habit, something that's a more healthy, sustainable habit, and a way of maybe getting them to quit overall. So on that piece about education, what is it that I guess yourself and the wider business do to really help promote that and make people aware of the benefits of vaping?
In terms of promoting the benefits of vaping, I think perhaps the biggest tool we have is our blog. And at one point we were getting up to 250,000 visitors a month from the blog, reading the articles. And it's been about talking about the benefits, but wherever we can, drawing on references. One thing we did do was a lot of interviews with scientists, because we learned a lot about science over the 14 years, but we're not scientists, so we need to build relationships with people doing the actual studies, and it's been really beneficial to talk to people who are at the cutting edge of the research and learn from them. So the blogging has been a big part of it. Combined with that, we've done various media interviews, and I've given talks at conferences, and even to the Labour Party, talking about the benefits. We've worked as well, spent quite a lot of time, especially around about the time the European Union was trying to ban electronic cigarettes. We spent a lot of time talking to MEPs, and I think that's probably one of the most valuable things we've done, because we got people who really, they didn't know about it, and we talked to them and they're skeptical, and then they went away and looked at the research, talked to people like scientists and activists, and actually a lot of them became very strongly in favour of vaping. And I think those people, those MEPs, were instrumental in stopping a ban on vaping. In fact, I looked at the voting patterns at the time, and if it hadn't been for British MEPs, I'm convinced that vote would have gone forward, and vaping would have been effectively banned.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because you think that we now, I guess, as a society, we're getting more and more educated and more aware of the benefits of vaping. But it's really interesting that based upon that was almost a kind of turning point moment where, if you think, well, if it had been about that, and if the accessibility of vaping hadn't been there for wider society, you'd have still had millions and millions of smokers out there. And then, well, what's the cost of that to society and to the economy and to the taxpayer of dealing with the negative effect of smoking? Whereas actually, that maybe concern around vaping now becomes, flip the full 180. And actually, the fact that there's now not a ban on it, it's now a real advocate for actually how it can promote, better health, reduce the strain on society, healthcare, and the taxpayers' money for having to deal with the negative effects of smoking. But just really shows the importance of education and people being open to an alternative point of view, but making sure that's backed up with the right information and right data.
Well, I really think, and especially in the early days, but probably still now, it has been a David and Goliath battle. I mean, we've seen dreadful studies come out, which have then been repeated across the media, with, I think, probably the deliberate aim of showing vaping to be as bad or worse than smoking. So one study that there was on vaping said that there were formaldehyde and a lot of other chemicals in. Which generally there are, but at very, very low levels, much lower than you find in cigarette smoke, and in some cases, similar to background air. But what they'd done was they attached the device to a machine and put a lot of power for it. And then what happens then is the coil. So that's the part of the device that heats up the liquid and turns into vapor. The coil burns. So what they do then is they measure the emissions from a burnt coil, and then they put it in a study, get it published, and suddenly everyone's convinced that it's just as bad as smoking. Another study which made waves was one which said that vaping causes heart attacks. And this was well publicised, went all over the world, quoted by the World Health Organization. But when some UK scientists looked at it and they go, hang on, they didn't say that. They didn't look at when these heart attacks took place. So did they take place before these people started vaping or after they started vaping. And what they found actually was a lot of these people had heart attacks before they started vaping. So, I mean, there's just there are hundreds of these bad studies, and I've lost track now because I know Clive Bates, who used to run Action on Smoking and Health, he sends out collections of studies every week, and there'll be 30 or so, and with call outs by him, and I can't keep track of them anymore. But there's been a major attempt to disparage vaping for many different reasons.
Yeah. And on that, I think we're on quite a good topic, just to flip this a little bit. What's your opinions on youth and children, well, not children, but kids vaping, and kind of what's your direction as a business on how you plan to either solve that problem, or is it seen as a problem? Again, I'm not someone that was massively involved in the industry, so I'm keen to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think until recently, until the last couple of years, it really wasn't a problem. But I am really concerned about the fact that disposable vape devices in the UK, it wasn't really a problem in the UK. Sorry, let me clarify. Concerned that disposable vape devices are very sweet, they're very colourful, they're currently trendy, hip, and it is leading to an increase in youth vaping. I mean, there are some caveats to that. And of course, the data is always looking backwards, so we don't necessarily know what the trend will be going forward. So I think one of the big caveats is that almost all regular users have previously smoked. Now, so what we're getting a lot of experimentation, but the data from Action on Smoking and Health is showing that the experimentation is not leading to regular use, which is important, right? Because on average, someone who smokes a cigarette will, well, above average, I think it's about 80%. On average, someone who smokes one cigarette will eventually become a regular smoker. And I think there's a reason for that. So, everyone says that nicotine is the addictive element in cigarettes. And that's true, but it's not the only addictive element. So there's a whole host of tobacco alkaloids which contribute to the addictiveness of smoking. So for example, when studies have been done with rats and they got nicotine mixed with tobacco alkaloids and they got pure nicotine, then rats will dose a lot more often when that nicotine, with the nicotine combined with tobacco alkaloids. So, vaping, I think it's mildly addictive, but it's less addictive than cigarettes. But as for the future, I mean, the thing is, whatever we do to try and prevent children from getting it, some will obtain it, right? Because, hey, we've all kids, and kids drink, and they do drugs, and they smoke, and now they vape, and at that age, you want to do things which are forbidden, you want to experiment, and you want to try new things. So I think on the one hand, it's impossible to eliminate entirely, and to the extent that if people are going to vape and not smoke, if you can do that, then that's a net benefit. Because I've been asked before, would I want my children to vape? And I definitely wouldn't want my children to vape. But if I had to choose between them vaping and smoking a cigarette, then I'd far rather they vape. And I wouldn't want them to vape because it is, it's less addictive than smoking, but it is addictive. And I don't want them to be like me and constantly looking for my cigarette, But also, it's not harmless, right? It's less harmful than smoking. So the current estimate is around about 5% of the risk of smoking, which is a hell of a lot better, but it's still 5% of a big risk. So a lot depends on will it continue to be mostly smokers regular vape? Will we get more people who take up regular vaping? I also think that youth vaping poses a massive risk to the UK vape industry, because what we're going to get in response, I think, or what we're already getting is calls for regulations which will make life more difficult for adult smokers who want to quit vaping. So, for example, most vapors don't use tobacco; they use flavors, and that's quite important, because when you use a non-tobacco flavor, it moves you further away from smoking. It's harder to go back, So you're going to get calls for things like bans on tobacco and plain packaging, and I think these calls will only increase. So what we can do, what we do, and a lot of it through our trade organisation, the IBVTA, which is the Independent British Vape Trade Association, is we work with trading standards. We try to educate retailers. So mostly specialist vape retailers are, the ones in our organisation are pretty well clued up, but getting that wider education out to people. I know the IBVTA run a lot of training sessions for trading standards. We're trying to get them to clamp down on illegal devices. So the people want the huge devices with more e-liquid than is legally allowed. One thing that we do, for example, is we've written guides for retailers on how to prevent underage sales, and we provide a free Challenge 25 for vaping poster. Which if any retailer wants it can just contact us. We'll send them one out for free. So there are things we can do, but I think all we can do at the end of the day is reduce the legal availability, because wherever there is demand, there will be a black market supply, and the nature of children is to rebel and to experiment. Do you guys think you would have vaped if you were 17?
Do you know what? I don't know is the answer to that, is the honest answer to that question. I can't say yes and I can't say no. And I think the reason I didn't smoke was because I didn't have a friendship group that smoked. And I think a lot of the people that I do know that do smoke had a friendship group that smoked, and it was seen to be normal. And it was something that you just did on a night out. It starts on a night out, it starts socially, and then all of a sudden you're doing it and you're having work breaks and you're smoking on your own. And I think that's something that I just never got into due to my sports background. I can't obviously speak for Alex.
Yeah, do you know what? I think similarly, but maybe in a slightly different mindset from why I didn't, is that I think as well, to be honest, this is a really grey area, but I think also it kind of comes down to sort of your personality, and that what you hear a lot of the time is that people who are drinkers, smokers, whatever else, actually a lot of it is down to the fact they have an addictive personality and they find something that fits that. I'm personally probably not somebody like that. There's nothing, I guess, particularly in my life that is a kind of I can't do without as such. So that's why for me, I had, similar to George, didn't really have loads of friends that smoked, but had enough friends, I think, when I was younger that could offer me a cigarette, and look, we've all been there, we tried it. I was that classic tried, I thought, geez, what the hell is that? Smoking, that is definitely not for me, because I did not enjoy that. But saying that, then vaping is probably a more pleasant experience than smoking. But the fact is that necessarily a bad thing, that if I was to take up vaping and not smoking? Because to your point, the net benefit for my own health and for wider society is probably still better that I become a vapor than a smoker.
Yeah, so I mean, we would never advise a non-smoker to take up vaping. If you don't use nicotine, you're better off not using nicotine. But if you're going to use nicotine, then you're better off using it in the safest forms. So, nicotine gum as well, the safest form of smokeless tobacco like snus, and vaping than you are smoking. So, and people have, ever since nicotine was discovered, people have used it, and sometimes the penalties have been severe. If you go back hundreds of years, a lot more severe than now. but no one has ever managed to stop nicotine use or drug use or alcohol use. And it's interesting as well to look at where people have tried to stop vaping. So in Australia, for example, and India, and what you've seen there is a proliferation of black market vape devices. And of course, the problem then is that you don't have the regulation and the controls. So, in the UK, we have to. There's controls over what ingredients go into e-liquid. You have to have emissions testing. So, you test the vapor to see what's in it. In the best companies, the toxicology over the last few years has made great strides in identifying something that could be harmful, and then eliminating it. Because one thing people always forget, they think that vaping is a static thing, but the safety profile is, among good regulated devices, is improving all the time, and there's no reason why we can't improve on that 5% harm over time. But of course, as soon as you make it illegal, well, people who are smuggling it into the country, they don't care about they don't care about quality, and I think you see the opposite, where the relative harm, for the most part, it's unlikely to ever reach smoking, but you can see the relative harm pushing up, because of the quality of the products.
Yeah, completely agree. It's like that with a lot of things, isn't it? You can try and take the hard line, and completely eradicate something. But the fact is, if there's still a demand for it, there will be a supply from somewhere. But then it's about, what's the quality?
I think it's crazy. I mean, despite all the lessons of, prohibition in America, the failed war on drugs, people still, they have this instinct to, it's bad for you, we don't like it, let's ban it. And if there's demand there, the ban doesn't mean that it disappears. You're just taking it away from, regulated business who have a motivation and a desire to maintain quality. I think if you banned flavors, for example, you wouldn't see flavors disappear. You would just see it go underground. I mean, one of the things the EU did was they put a limit on the amount of e-liquid that you can have in a tank. So what you have now is you have thousands of shops across the UK selling these things under a counter. I was in one of our shops, and they're telling me whether they were, there's a convenience store which is selling similar devices. And so saying, we're more competitive in price, we give better service. So why are they still selling them? They said, well, they got these illegal devices under the counter, and they sell those, so people still go to them. And you can't compete with that.
No, it's really interesting.
I really agree. So look, I guess we've covered some really great topics there. So I guess there are a few kind of closing questions would be kind of good to pick your brains on. So these are more general, not necessarily vaping related questions. So this just gives us a little more of an insight into kind of you and your kind of wider personality. So, but what's the and this can be e-cigarette, vaping related if you want it to be. But what's one really good piece of advice that you would give to anyone? It can be related to anything that's been inspirational, life lesson. One piece of advice about anything that you think, right, this is a good lesson that I'd like to give to everyone.
I'd say one of the biggest things that's affected my life over the last 10 years or maybe longer is the idea of focusing on your sphere of influence. So I think you heard the idea. I mean, it was popularized by Stephen Covey, but I think there's a link to Stoicism. The philosophy of Stoicism. So the Stoics said, the only thing worth worrying about is what you can control, and they say the only thing you can control really is your thoughts and perceptions. And even that, I think, they didn't understand modern psychology. So you might be able to control some of your thoughts and perceptions. So you've got what you can control, and then you've got things you can influence, and then you've got a whole world of things you can't do anything about. But what I find is, myself included, although I remind myself is that people spend a lot of time worrying and a lot of emotional energy on things they have got no control over. And it's a hard thing to do, but as you practice and you redivert your energy to things you can control or you can influence, I think you become happier because you're working on something you can do something about. And I also think you become more effective. And I think this is one thing with all the blogging and talking on electronic cigarettes. So there's an awful lot of bad things in the world you can't do anything about, and there's there's an awful lot of very good things in the world which could do with support. But then for me, I had vaping, which is it has the potential literally to save millions of lives across the world, or tens of millions over time. But you have institutions and people and companies, so some of them with very powerful, with very big pockets, trying to crush it, which is what I think really made me passionate about it. And then you find yourself in a position where you can do something to influence it. And so I think that philosophy and being in that position is what drove a lot of my work on electronic cigarettes, especially things outside the business, contributing on a study and giving talks and doing interviews.
Yeah, that's a really big thing for you as well, isn't it? Because you're you're not just really passionate and focused on your business, but as the sector, the industry, the community as a whole, you're a really big advocate for it, and you do a lot of work to really promote the sector, the benefits, and the people within it as well, right?
Well, and I don't want to blow my horn. There's a lot of advocates out there. And I do get I have a company behind me which pays me for my time, so it's and there are a lot of people out there who are not getting paid, who are doing an awful lot of work because they felt the difference vaping has made to them, and they're absolutely outraged that people are trying to ban it, and they want more smokers to have access to it, and some absolutely fantastic people out there.
Awesome, brilliant.
I think one of the other closing questions was, what was one mental habit or framework? And I think you've pretty much covered all of it, to be honest. I think that's what it is. And I think, I'm a true believer in kind of where your focus goes, energy flows. And I think you can really, no matter what topic you're looking for, you could be looking for one of the most unharmful topics in the world. You will still find negativity if you're looking for it. And it's one of those things, isn't it, with vaping? You can type in one word on Google, which is vaping. And if you're looking for negativity, you'll find it. But if you're looking for positive things about it, you'll also find it. It depends which one you want to consume. And that's entirely down to the person that's actually reading it. So look, closing out, I've actually really enjoyed this podcast, to be honest. I think you've brought some really good topics to the table. We've covered them in really good detail, and I think I could probably do another podcast with you just on the end piece about psychology and how that works. I think that's such an interesting topic. But look, we are out of time, unfortunately. But where can people find you on social media and get in touch if they want to have a chat with you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Twitter at Twitter/INI James. It's actually a username I came up when I worked with in Indonesian, so it's Indonesian for this is James. Or they can search for James Dunworth on LinkedIn, or find me writing on the Ashtray blog.
Great stuff. Look, really appreciate both your times. Thank you, James, and thanks, Alex.
All right, thank you very much.
Take care.